I think Harry Houdini said the easiest way to attract a crowd is to let it be known that someone is going to attempt something that in the event of failure will result in certain death. I think that the stakes are high, and this is they are either going to pull off the magic trick or it's going to come to a sticky end. Watch this space. So I'm fascinated by politics. I'm also fascinated by magic, and I think they've got lots in common. Because the knack to understanding politics is quite similar to the knack to understanding a great magic trick. And the number one rule of grasping magic is don't listen to what the magician is saying. Watch the hands. The topic, in my opinion, does the right need a more powerful state, seems to be based on an interpretation of the last half a century or so of conservative politics that kind of misses the trick. It misses what just happened because it kind of pays too much attention to what the lips have been saying and not enough to the clever things that the hands have been doing while no one is looking, right? And there's a premise to the question, which is that the last lot of conservatives believed in a weak state, and therefore there's this new lot, and maybe they kind of believe in a more powerful state. And I think that's kind of incorrect, because Thatcher Reaganism, it stood for a powerful state. So the lips were saying free markets, lower taxes, but the hands were kind of doing that stuff, privatization, etc. But they were also, at the same time, building this powerful legislating state that crushed the unions. It centralized power away from councils. It increased police powers. It built prisons. And so I wouldn't even say that was a betrayal of neoliberalism, because actually, if you read Hayek, there's a conscious desire to distinguish themselves from this kind of 19th century laissez-faire liberalism. And they believe that liberty kind of thrives in the system of rules, which enforces a strong state in order to preserve rule of law and preserve market freedom and market competitiveness. And the goal of Mont Pelerin basically was this middle way, they said, between the jail and the jungle. And I think that the next iteration of conservatism will neither be a repudiation of this kind of Thatcherite magic trick. It will not be a revival of Thatcherism in pure form. I think that it will be a kind of mirror image. And what do I mean by a mirror image? Well, we live now in a world where what wins elections are not campaigns that appeal to freedom, for reasons which I think are kind of beyond the scope of today, but have a powerful promise of security. And so my inkling is that if there is a popular conservatism which comes to power, the lips will say security, the lips will say border control, take back control, smart state. And the hands will do a bit of that, or quite a lot of that maybe. But it will also do things like tax cuts, a war on waste in the civil service. So it's a different kind of trick. And we're kind of already seeing it with Trumpism, kind of this protectionism, which is also part of the reason that Trump is going for tariffs, is because he wants to use that money to fund tax cuts. And he wants a devaluation of the dollar, right? But that's good for manufacturing, competitive exports, but that's good for the crypto billionaires too. So there is this balancing act going on. That's quite clever, actually. That said, I don't want to downplay the fact that there is quite a powerful pivot going on in conservatism. So if we, in a previous era, had libertarianism with securitism as characteristics, we're moving to security with libertarian characteristics. And just to return very quickly to the theme of magic, I think Harry Houdini said the easiest way to attract a crowd is to let it be known that someone is going to attempt something that in the event of failure will result in certain death. I think that the stakes are high, and this is they are either going to pull off the magic trick or it's going to come to a sticky end. Watch this space.
And that's very much the way in which I plan to chair this debate, I have to say. Thank you, Sherelle. We're now going to open up to a wider debate, and we'd like to start, before getting to some of the issues of particular parties, could be Reform UK, could be the Labour, could be Conservative, whoever it is, and the details of that, into some of the points of principle. Because in a sense, some would argue, might disagree, that we have different flavors of an emergent type of conservatism sitting on the stage at the moment. Not everyone here would necessarily define themselves that way, but certainly there are strands of thinking that fit within that broad tradition. Now, earlier, Richard, you were making it clear that you're prepared to be pragmatic, to sort of pick and choose between different types of option. But in the end, the thing that seemed to run through it was an idea that does sit on what's generally being considered the political right. You mentioned entrepreneurship, you mentioned the idea of essentially trying to loosen regulation. It's not unreasonable, is it, to essentially call you a politician of the right?
I think most people characterise that. I think we're the party of common sense because we take a little bit of each.
Is there any politician who says that they're not the politician of common
sense? Frankly, there's not much common sense in the main two parties, which is why we exist, because the main two parties basically have let people down. They haven't delivered in either sense. And
but we're asking about your party, Richard, and your political views. So we'll get to the other parties in a bit. But
our view is interesting. You know, I've used the word smart, and I think a smart state can do things better. David used the word decent. I mean, all I can say is the experience of the closer I get to the workings of the state, having been elected and now having won control of some councils, is, in terms of sort of saying you could save £5 in 100, David, I was being cautious. The quantity of abuse, waste, incompetence, fraud, dodgy contracts is an absolute scandal. And you can cut that unnecessary spending and provide a same or better service. And if you achieve that, right, if we achieve that, and that's our challenge, then I think we get to a smart system, smart state, smart council. That's the goal.
Well, I wish you luck in that goal, but I mean, you have very, very little room for manoeuvre. I mean, almost everything that local authorities do is statutory. State decides you have to spend so much on, you know, looking after children, looking after old people, whatever.
And here's the difference between someone who's actually getting into the heart of it, lifting the lid on the bonnet and see what on earth is going on, and the theory, David. Because, you know, when I lift the lid of something going on and being told, some of you may have heard it, you need to sign an 11-year IT contract, you don't, right? Committing the council to hundreds of millions of pounds, right? That is a grotesque waste and incompetent, and that's just one example. 20-year pothole contracts where there's no supervision, no productivity, no measurement. This is an absolute outrage, and frankly, the closer I get to it, the more annoyed I get on behalf of the taxpayer.
Yeah.
Sherelle.
Yeah, no, I just think that this exchange is totally fascinating, and it just encapsulates for me the chasm or the divide that is at the heart of right-wing politics at the moment. And I think if you go back in history, like, where does the term right-wing come from? And it comes from the French Revolution, when in the National Assembly, you had the politicians on the right of the National Assembly who were wanted to protect the monarchy, the clergy, the aristocracy, and you had the people on the left who were pro-revolution. And traditionally, conservatism is about a certain skepticism of this radical utopian progressivism. They are in favour of incremental change at best, and also the preservation of precious institutions and values.
A Burkean type of conservatism.
Yeah, Burkean conservatism, precisely. But increasingly, there is this other strand on the right who do want to see radical change, who do think that things are fundamentally broken in some way and that you need some kind of radical and even utopian politics in a way, just having a radical vision, an alternative one to this kind of technocratic centrist status quo, which just seems to be about managerial decline. And this tension has been there for some time. It's been there at least since Thatcher, because there was this question about, was Thatcher a radical, right? But what held it together, I think, this sort of marriage of convenience between these traditional conservatives and these more radical libertarians, if you like, was the common enemy, which was socialism. And also, just the libertarianism wasn't too threatening to social conservatism because they had quite a narrow definition of freedom. It was about market freedom, and social conservatives could get on board with that. And it's kind of broken down, and now we have war, and
you mean war between these two?
War between these two, and there is this kind of standoff between, well, is it better the devil you know when it comes to like this the status quo of technocracy, or do you need to bludgeon the monster to death?
Can I ask you, Sherelle, do you find yourself, you're a prominent columnist, you have a regular column in the Telegraph, do you find yourself on one side or the other of the chasm that you...
Yeah, I find myself sort of edging towards the radical side.
You can look at him like...
Yeah. I think I'm more here than there, just because I do feel like there's something went wrong in terms of the libertarian, the neoliberal revolution. It kind of calcified into some kind of technocratic monster. I feel like something does need to.
Can I throw that to David?
I just don't think they have the room for manoeuvre on this issue of the size of the state that you seem to think they have. I mean, they can be radical on stopping immigration. They can leave the European Convention on Human Rights and all of that. I mean, but look at. I mean, the overselling of DOGE, I think, is a kind of warning to you. Don't oversell this idea that you can radically cut the state. You can maybe make it more efficient at the margin, but also remember what happened to Liz Truss. We still do have a constraint, a huge constraint on our politics, and it is called the bond market. It's kind of taken the place of the old gold standard. The modern gold standard is the bond market, and they prevent politicians from just printing money and debauching currencies and just, the democratic pressure is obviously always just to spend more and more money.
I talk about this probably more than anybody, bluntly. I'm the guy on the spring statement that did 14 interviews and said the OBR's numbers were delusional on the borrowing. Right? No other politician is talking about the fact we borrowed 150 billion quid last year, $5,000 per household. In the last month, we've borrowed 20 billion quid. I'm well aware of it, which is why I talk about cutting the waste first, and then you can get a direction of travel.
Do you accept David's challenge, Richard, that the case of Elon Musk over the last few months in the United States is a dreadful warning about how not to do it, or would you not accept that case?
At the end of the day, all I'm saying is, from what I'm seeing now, lifting the bonnet and actually looking at what's underneath.
But you must learn from overseas.
Yeah, of course.
Elon Musk is a problem.
Exactly right.
So
we've got to learn from overseas.
So what do you learn from Elon Musk's case?
We've got to learn a whole bunch of things. Maybe communications, the way you do things and communicate and negotiate, maybe you do that behind closed doors, not in front of the world's media. But do I believe that we can dramatically do things more efficiently by cutting out wasteful spending? Yes, in a big way. And I think we can do that and still provide the services better. And yes, you're right. Now we've got to actually start performing, and that's the challenge.
We had a government. Government's just come into power, and there was a huge debate about. I mean, there's a huge consensus in this country that we are over-regulated, at least when it comes to kind of housing and building stuff. And yet, and this government, it's not performing brilliantly. You'd have thought that, if it was easy to do, they would be doing it, and we would already be seeing the kind of number of permissions to build factories and build houses going up. We're not. So there's something on the other side of the curve.
They've done the easy bit, which is to give huge pay rises to the public sector with no productivity requirements, no performance requirements. They did it in last summer, and now they're doing it again. And guess what? Spending's out of control, borrowing's out of control, and if we carry on like this, it's not going to end well, as you said earlier.
But how do you get to a place, Richard, where if people are going to do all the things that if you were in government, wanted to do, build more houses, create a more secure society, the kind of agendas that David has about, care for the elderly and so forth, real life people have to do those things. AI and robots can go a certain way, but you actually need to employ people. People are human. They are the cause, surely, of the obstacles you're putting forward. It's human nature. That's a rather conservative thought, if I might say so.
It's about motivating people, it's about motivating risk takers, but also making sure that people perform well and do their job. And David, and actually, look, I think most people say, hey, you do your job, none of us are perfect, we'll make mistakes. Your boss will say, hopefully in a sort of sensible, rational way, you've done this well, you haven't done that well, you need to improve on here.
Is that what Nigel says?
Well, yeah. As you can imagine, in a gentle sort of way.
And he said that to Mr. Lowe, didn't he?
But fundamentally, you might have to give a yellow card. You might give a couple of yellow cards. Sometimes you've got to be prepared to give a red card. And that's the bottom line, because if you're not, you won't get performance.
Sherelle, is what you're hearing from Richard about the way forward something that inspires you? You want a new kind of right...
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.